Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Peter the Booklover, and this is Book Talk. This is where I talk about the books that I recently read. And in this episode, this is episode number 21, I'm going to talk about Mrs. Dalloway. This book was written by Virginia Woolf, and it's a very good book. Let's talk about it. Hello, everybody. I am Peter the Booklover, and I like to read a lot of books, and I like to talk about books, so I decided to make a YouTube channel talking about the books that I have read. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking about Virginia Woolf's classic, Mrs. Dalloway. It's an interesting book, and I'm going to enjoy talking about it. But before I get into the book, I really want to spend a couple seconds to tell my audience that I really appreciate you being here. You mean a lot that you've came here, and I want to thank you for coming by. It means a lot to me. Thank you for being here. Okay, let's talk about this book. This is Mrs. Dalloway. This was written in 1925 by Virginia Woolf. And before I get into this book, I want to give a suggestion to the people that haven't read this book, or the people that have read this book but didn't really enjoy this book, is that the best way to enjoy this book is to actually watch a summary of this book before you read it. And the reason why I say that is because it's a little bit confusing if you read it without knowing what's going on. If you know what's going on, this book is a lot more simple to understand. And a big reason why that is because this book has no chapters. It's literally just one chapter, the whole book. It's like 194 pages. And the thing about this book, this is like being in the heads of several people. And you're going from about 9 different characters on each of the way they're thinking, their past, and what they're thinking about, and their perspective. And you like jump from person to person. And sometimes it's not really clear when you're going from person to person. So I suggest that you actually watch a summary of this and then read this book. And trust me, it's not going to ruin the book. It's going to make it better. Now, the thing about this is the second book I read by Virginia Woolf. The first book that I read by her was To the Lighthouse. And that was an interesting book, but it really didn't grab me as much as this book did. And the thing about it is I want to actually give that book another chance later because her writing style is a little complicated. It's not very simple. She doesn't take her reader by the hand. She actually respects the audience to have intelligence to figure out what message she's portraying to you. So I suggest that, you give her a good shot because she's not going to take you by the hand like a lot of authors do, and so you don't have to think. You have to think a little bit when you read her books, at least the 2 that I have read. Now, what this book is about is it's really set in one day. It's in the middle of June, and this is London, and this is a day that Carissa Dalloway, the main character, is going to have a party later on that night. And she's getting ready for the party. And the first head that you're in, the first perspective that you see is her perspective as she goes to the flower store and picks up flowers. And as she's on the way to the flower store, she runs into a character, Hugh Whitman. And they actually have a little bit of a conversation. And then she gets to the flower store. And when she's at the flower store, there's a car on the street, because this is in 1925, so cars are still new. But there's a car on the street that backfires, and it makes like a gunshot. She hears it in the flower shop. The store owner hears it, and they look out, and they're trying to figure out who's driving this car. Now, the thing about it is that this car really doesn't go anywhere. This is not really what the story is about. When you're reading it, though, you don't know that. So I actually thought this car was going to be have more meaning than it does. But it really doesn't have a lot of meaning. But the reason why this car is there is so they could switch to another character, Septimus. Septimus Smith, to be exact, and he's married to a wife, Riza. And thing about Septimus is a person that served in the war, World War One, and he's shell-shocked still. And at the same time, he's actually thinking about killing himself. And that's why this is there. And then at the same time, there's an airplane flying around, and you get your attention drawn to this airplane, but the airplane really isn't a part of the story. The story's main objective is to get to this party that Mrs. Dalloway, Clarissa, is throwing. So you meet Septimus, and as we go back to Clarissa, you actually go into her head, and she's thinking about a character she knew from her past, Peter Walsh. And Peter Walsh is a character that winds up showing up in this book. But she's thinking about Peter Walsh, and then she goes home, and then she's getting ready for this party, and sometime during the party, he comes by and visits her. And then they get to know they're talking to her. And then at the time when he shows up, we meet Elizabeth, her daughter. And then they separate for a while. Then we go back into Septimus's thinking. We spend some time into Peter Walsh's thinking. And then it goes around to different people. And then later on, we wind up going into her husband's thinking, Richard Dalloway. And he goes to a party. Then we go to where the party he goes to, the hostess at the dinner, the hostess and the lunch that they have, they go into her thinking. And then we bounce back to Richard's thinking, and also you Whitman, but we really don't go into his head too often. We're just like a paragraph to where they go into his perspective. But we go into the perspective of Richard, and then we go back to Peter, and then we go back to Clarissa. Then we spend some time with Elizabeth's thinking, and she actually is spending time with another person, Mrs. Kilman. And Mrs. Kilman does not like Clarissa, so there's a part of the book to where they meet Clarissa, Mrs. Dalloway, and they don't like each other. And you could tell that because they have her perspective of Mrs. Kilman's perspective, and also the perspective of Mrs. Dalloway. And they really don't like each other. And Mrs. Dalloway is jealous because she thinks Elizabeth wants to spend more time with Mrs. Kilman than she does with her mother. But Elizabeth is not really thinking about that. Elizabeth is a person that's just coming of age, and she's starting to be attractive, and she's attracting men and stuff. So she's really not thinking about either one of those. She's thinking about herself. Yeah, and then we eventually get to this party. Now, before this party happens, I'm giving away a spoiler, kind of, but not really, because it really doesn't matter. But Septimus, the person that's thinking about killing himself, actually winds up committing suicide. And then, a little bit later, at the party, the subject gets brought up to Mrs. Dalloway that Septimus kills himself. And the result of him killing himself, Mrs. Dalloway actually appreciates life a little bit more, because she actually, because of this suicide, she actually starts to feel better about herself, and she's a little bit happy. And pretty much the party is over and the book ends. And that's pretty much what it is. There's more detail than I'm giving, but that's my basic summary of what happens in this book. And this is very interesting because the most interesting thing about this book is that it's you're seeing all these perspectives of different people and see how they feel about things, how they're thinking about things, the things they remember from their past. And it's very interesting. I like this book quite a bit. It's a very good read, and I highly recommend it. This is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, and this is a book I recommend. Another interesting thing about this book, that before I say my goodbye to everybody, is that Big Ben is a prominent figure in this book. There are several parts of this book that Big Ben chimes, and they let you know what time it is throughout this novel. And this is just one day in the middle of June in London. And it's pretty interesting, so that's about it. That's Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. Check it out. Okay, so that's the video. I want to thank you for being here. Now, do me a favor, if you like the video, it means a lot to me if you would hit the like button. The like button means a lot to me, so I would appreciate it if you hit it. If you do, thank you. And anybody that's willing to leave comments, I would love to hear from you. The comments mean a lot, so if you have any questions, or if you just want to say hello, or any kind of comment you want to leave, please leave me a comment. I really appreciate those. I like communicating with the audience. That's why I do this. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do me a favor, subscribe to my channel. I make new content all the time, and I try to make it as interesting as possible. I'm still working on it. I'm not great at this yet, but I am working on it, and I try to improve as I go along. So that's about it. I'm Peter the Book Lover. I want to thank you for coming by, and I hope to see you in the next video.